Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and Emiras Hashem today we will be learning Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Tzitzis, and we pick up today in Siman Yud with Sif Dalid on Yud Zayin Amud Beis, 3 lines off the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber in Sif Dalid, Talis Shel Beged. If you have a talis, you have a four-cornered garment that is made out of beged, meaning it's made out of cloth, it's made out of fabric. Uknafeha shel oir, but the corners of the garment are made out of leather. Says the Mechaber Chayeves, this garment is chayiv in tzitzis. Now let's remember, the Torah Kedosha tells us what is chayiv in tzitzis, a beged. We had earlier at the outset of Siman Yud, a machlokes to Mechaber and the Ramah, what is meant by beged. The sheet of the Mechaber is that midaraisa, the only type of beged that's chayiv in tzitzis, is either a beged shel tzemer, a beged made out of sheep's wool, or a beged shel pishtan, a beged made out of linen. And we learned in the Mishnah Berurah that the Mechaber takes this from a brisa. The brisa draws a comparison between the halachas of nigei begadim, tzaras that afflicts a beged, and tzitzits. By nigei begadim, the Torah HaKadosh specifies beged tzemer oy beged pishtim. And from there we deduce that whenever the Torah refers to a beged, it means tzemer u pishtim. Thus, the Mechaber paskins that it's only a beged of tzemer or of pishtim that are chayiv in tzitzits midaraisa. Other begadim are chayiv midarabanan. The Ramah said that no, the Ramah said any kind of beged is chayiv in tzitzis midaraisa. However, everybody agrees that we're talking about a beged made out of fabric, not a beged made out of the hide of an animal, out of leather. So, leather, is not chayiv in tzitzis. Based on this, says the Mechaber, what happens if you have talis shel beged, you have a four-cornered garment that's made out of fabric, but uknafeha shel or, but the corners of the beged are made out of leather. Does that mean that now the beged is patur in tzitzits because the corners are or? After all, the pasuk, the Torah Kedosha says, where do you put your tzitzits? Tzitzits al knaf bigdechem. You put the tzitzits hakonof. You put the tzitzits on the corner. So maybe if the corner is something that's not chayiv in tzitzits, maybe the beged is patur. The Mechaber says no. Talis shel beged uknafer shel or chayeves. Such a garment is still obligated in tzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut and test shel beged diksiv asher techase ba. How do we know this? That if the talis is cloth and the corners are leather, you're still chayiv. Says the Mishnah Berurah because the pasuk says a beged asher techase ba, that you cover yourself with. Ve'ein adam miskase ela be'ikar habeged. When a person covers himself with a beged, he covers himself with the main part of the beged. He doesn't cover himself just with the corners of the beged. He covers himself with the ikar habeged, the main portion of the beged. And therefore, hilkach azlidan basrei. Therefore, we go after the ikar of the beged. And the ikar of this beged is fabric. It's a beged shell, it's a talis shell beged. The ikar is made out of fabric. It's only the corners that are made out of or. Va'afilu imakam beged kulay ogoil. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true. Let's say the cloth part of the beged has no corners. The cloth part of the beged has rounded corners. And now, ve'ein sham knaf rak shebechubarin elav knafay shel or. Now what somebody did was they fashioned leather attachments and stitched it on to this fabric beged to make square corners. So there's an interesting case that the Mishnah Berurah is giving. The Mishnah Berurah is saying like this. The Mechaber tells us that if the talis is cloth and the corners are leather, you're chayiv in tzitzis. Asks the Mishnah Berurah basically, how about if the cloth part of the beged doesn't even have its own corners? The ends of the beged talis are rounded. The only reason this beged has kanfais at all is because somebody fashioned leather pieces and stitched them on to the rounded ends of the beged and made square corners out of leather. So now the only thing that's bringing this beged to a chiyuv of tzitzits at all is the leather. Without the leather, there would be no chiyuv of tzitzis because there are no conflics, there are no corners. Still in all, says the Mishnah Berurah, chayiv. This is still chayiv. The basar ikara beged azlinon. The bottom line is that we look at the beged and we say that the ikar of the beged is cloth. So the ikar of the beged is something that bichayv in tzitzis. Doesn't have kanfais? Yes, it does. Why? Because it has these leather kanfais. The kanfais are leather, but the ikar of the beged is cloth. So it is chayiv in tzitzis. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton yud uknafeha shel or. The corners are made out of leather. V'hu adinim hayaroiva talis beged v'hashar or chayevis. The same halacha would apply. Let's say the majority of the garment is made out of cloth, and a minority portion is made out of leather. Still in all, since the roiv is beged, we go after the ikar of the beged. It's cloth. It's chayev. Now the mechaber goes on to the next case. He, 2 lines from the bottom near the beginning of the line. How about the opposite case? He shall the beged itself is made out of leather. Uknafeha shall beged. And now it's only the corners that are made out of cloth. Says the mechaber p'tura. Says the Chavetz Chaim as cut yud aleph uknafeha shall beged. For hu hadinim rak roiv hatalis shall The same halacha would apply if the majority of the beged is made out of leather. Afal gav shegam b'miut habeged yesh bo shir talis. Even if the minority portion of the beged, the part that's made out of cloth, is big enough to have its own independent chiyuv of tzitzis. In other words, the chiyuv, we're going to learn that the chiyuv, the minimum size of a beged to be chayiv in tzitzis, is 3/4 of an amma in front, 3/4 of an amma in the back. Let's say you have a piece of fabric that is that size. You have a beged that has the cloth component of the beged, has that minimum size. But there's an attachment to the beged, which is the majority of the beged that is made out of leather. That beged is potter in tzitzis. Why? Because we go after the ikar of the beged, and the roiv of the beged is leather. And leather is not chayiv in tzitzis. And that's true despite the fact that the minority component of the beged that's made out of cloth is still big enough to carry its own independent chiyuv of tzitzis. Doesn't matter. It's subjugated to the leather component of the beged. The ikar of the beged is and therefore it's potter in tzitzis. The kevin she ikar amalbush enishal beged lo karina be al kanfe vigdehem va'ar potter afilim and Rabbanon. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you should know leather, according to the mechaber, according to the Ramah, leather is potter in tzitzis even midrabanon. The einoi klal bechlal beged, because it is not considered a beged at all. V'chein adin betalis shetachtav tafor ba'ar chayeves. The same halacha applies. We learned this already earlier about the outer component of a beged and the lining of a beged. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein adin betalis shetachtav tafor ba'ar. Let's say you have a garment where the outer surface is fabric, but it's lined with leather. Chayeves, it's chayev. Why? Because the outer surface is the ikar of the beged. So we go basar the ikar is fabric, it's chayev and tzitzis. V'ema elyon shel but the opposite way, if the outer surface of the beged is leather and the lining is fabric, patura, then it's pater. Ki hatachtoin hu hatafel lo ha'elyon, because the lining is secondary to the surface. Shehu ikar habeged, the surface is the ikar. Okay, now we move on to Sifei, 2 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, middle of the line. We mentioned yesterday the concept of taseh v'loy mina osui in the context of tzitzits. So, the pasuk in the Torah Dirshu, the pasuk tells us in Parshas Kiseitze, Gedilim taselach, you should make fringes for yourself, al arba kanfos kisusacha, on the 4 corners of your garment, asher techaseba, that you cover yourself with. Gedilim taselach, you should make gedilim al arba kanfos kisusacha, on the 4 corners of your beged. Now the implication of this pasuk is that you have a beged that has 4 corners, and since it's a beged with 4 corners, it's chayiv in tzitzits, and therefore the Torah Kedosha says, Gedilim tasalach. Now you have to make tzitzis for that beged. Gedilim tasalach, make tzitzis where? Al arba kanfos kisusacha, on the four corners of your garment. So you have a four-cornered garment that carries an obligation for tzitzits. Make tzitzits for that garment. So when are you making the tzitzits? You're making the tzitzits when you already have a four-cornered garment that is chayiv in tzitzits. But what if you have a garment that's not chayiv in tzitzits? What if you have a garment that only has three corners? A three-cornered garment is not chayiv in tzitzits. Now you take this three-cornered garment and you put tzitzits on the three corners. Then you take a scissor and you cut the garment to fashion a fourth corner. Now it's chayiv in tzitzits. No problem. I take another four strings and I tie tzitzits onto the fourth corner. Is that okay? Well, I have a beged of dalet kanfos and it has tzitzits on each corner. Why not? The answer is because it's tasev aloim and asui. Because the Torah says you first have a beged of four corners that's chayiv in tzitzits, and on that, gedilim taselach. But that's not what you did. You had a three-cornered beged, and you put tzitzits on three of the corners. Now that three-cornered beged was not chayiv in tzitzits. So you put three sets of tzitzit strings onto a beged that was not chayiv in tzitzits. Then you took a scissor and you made a fourth corner. Now you created a beged that's chayiv in tzitzits. After you created a beged that's chayiv in tzitzits, you put one set of tzitzits on one corner. No, that doesn't work. Because the three original sets of tzitzit strings that you put on bipsul. You put on when you had a beged that wasn't chayiv in tzitzits. That's the psul of tasev aloim and asui. Let's see it inside in the Mechaber here. Sif Hey, 2 lines from the bottom. Yod Zayin Amud Beis. Says the Mechaber, Hayu la shalosh kenafos. Let's say you had a garment that had three corners. Va'asa behem shalosh tzitziyos. And you put three sets of tzitzit strings on the three corners. Vishuv asaloi knaf revi. Then you went ahead and you took a scissor and you cut the garment to fashion a fourth corner. Vasa gambai tzitzits. And now you added a set of tzitzit strings onto that corner. Says the Mechaber, psula. This is puzzle, mishum taseh v'loi min ha'asui, because of the concept of taseh v'loi min ha'asui. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cutting Yud Beis. 5 lines from the bottom. Shalosh knafos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there's another case where this halacha of taseh v'loi min ha'asui is negeya. Says the Chavetz Chaim, afilu im mitchila hayu la arba kanfos im tzitzis. Let's say you had a talis cotton, a perfectly kosher talis cotton. So it's a beged that has four corners, and it even has tzitzits on it. So it's an existing talis cotton that's perfectly kosher. V'achakach nechtach knaf echad. You went ahead and you cut off one corner. V'nase ogoil. You cut off one corner in a manner that rounded off the fourth corner. So again, you had a perfectly kosher pair of tzitzits, a talis cotton, that had four corners, and it had tzitzits on it. But you took a scissor, and you cut off one corner, and rounded it. So what do you have now? Now you have a beged that has three corners. On those three corners, it has tzitzits, but the fourth corner is rounded without tzitzits. And now what do you want to do? Now you're going to take a scissor, and you're going to cut that fourth corner, and you're going to square it off again. Ooh, now it's chayiv in tzitzits again. And now you're going to take tzitzits and put them back on the fourth corner. Now let's analyze that case. Is that tasev aloim and asui? Let's compare it to the case of the Mechaber. The case of the Mechaber was, you had a beged that had three corners. Is a beged with gibel kanfos chayiv in tzitzits? No. You took tzitzits and you put them on the three corners. Did you make those tzitzits bekashrus? No, because you put them on a three-cornered beged. Now you took a scissor and you created a fourth corner and you put tzitzits on the fourth corner. Said the Mechaber, that's possible because tasev aloim and asui. The three original tzitzits that you put on that beged, they were put on bipsul. They were put on when it was only a three-cornered garment. Then after they were on, you cut a fourth corner and you made it a beged chayiv in tzitzis. That doesn't work. That's tasev aloim and asui. That's the case of the Mechaber. The case of the Mishnah Berurah, though, has a critical difference. The case of the Mishnah Berurah, you had a garment with four corners. It's 100% chayiv in tzitzits. You put tzitzits on each one of the four corners. When you put those tzitzits on, every one of those tzitzit strings was put on bekashrus. And when you finished, you had a perfectly kosher talis cotton. Now you cut off one corner and you rounded it. Now the talis cotton is puzzle. It's a beged that only has 3 kanfas. It's not chayiv and tzitzis. Now you took a scissor and you re-squared off the 4th corner and you put the tzitzits back. Now this case is different than the mechaber's case because in this case, every one of the sets of tzitzis strings was put on when the beged was chayiv and tzitzits. The 3 sets that remained on the beged after you rounded off the 4th corner, those 3 sets of strings were put on back when the tzitzits was a perfectly normal talis cotton with 4 corners. The last one that you're putting on now, you also put on bekashrus because you put it on after you once again squared off the 4th corner. So really, if we analyze this case, all of the tzitzit strings were put on to this beged bekashrus. So you might say that this is not tasev v'loiman asui. All of the tzitzis were put on bekashrus. Now it's true that there was an intervening period of time when the talis cotton became puzzle. When you took the scissor and you rounded off the 4th corner, it became puzzle until you re-squared it off again and put tzitzits back on again. But during that time, when the talis cotton was puzzle, you didn't put on any tzitzis strings. All of the tzitzis strings were put on when this beged was chayiv and tzitzis. So you would think that there's a very rational argument to make that this is not a problem of tasev v'loiman asui. Says the Chofetz Chaim, no. It is tasev v'loiman asui. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. He's cutting your base. Afilu im mitchila hayu la arba kanfos im tzitzis. Even if it originally this was a perfectly kosher pair of tzitzis. It had dalet kanfos and it had tzitzis on each corner. V'achar kach nechtav knaf echad v'nasa ogol. And then you cut off one corner and rounded it, passeling the talis cotton. Even if you now fix that rounded off corner, what does that mean? You take a scissor and you re-square it, and you put tzitzits back onto that corner. Nevertheless, the talis cotton is puzzle. Why? Elu hashalosh tzitzits memela nispatlu. The original 3 sets of tzitzit strings on this beged became bottle when you rounded off the 4th corner. When you rounded off the 4th corner, those tzitzis are not tzitzis anymore because they're not on a beged of talit kanfos. So by rounding off the 4th corner and making this a beged that's no longer chayiv in tzitzis, you are mevatel the tzitzis on the other 3 corners. Like we're going to see very clearly in the Mechaber later on in Siman Tezvav. Now what happens? Now you re-square off a corner. You just now created a beged that's chayiv in tzitzis. You have to put tzitzits on. First you have to have a beged that's chayiv in tzitzis. Then you put the tzitzits on. Now that's not the case over here. Now it's true. Originally you put all the tzitzits on when it was a 4-cornered garment. But then you rounded off one corner. It was no longer a 4-cornered garment. Now, when you re-square off that corner, you're creating a garment that's chayiv in tzitzis. It already has 3 sets of tzitzis on it. Wait a second. Those 3 sets of tzitzis, when were they put on? They weren't put on when this beged was chayiv in tzitzis. Oh, yes, they were. They were put on 6 months ago when it was a 4-cornered garment. Yeah, but that's not this garment. That was that garment 6 months ago. That was a 4-cornered garment. But yesterday you rounded off one corner and you turned it into a beged that was not chayiv in tzitzis. Now you re-squared off the corner. You made it once again a beged that's chayiv in tzitzis, but it already had the 3 sets of tzitzis strings on it. That's tasev v'loiman asui. Very interesting. So what do you have to do, says the Mishnah Berurah? V'tzarech lahatiram, you would have to take off those remaining 3 sets of tzitzis strings, v'lachzor u'lekashram, and you would have to go tie them on again. Now we go to Sif Yud Gimel. So the case of the Mechaber over here was, you had a 3-cornered garment, and you put on 3 sets of tzitzis strings. Then you fashioned the 4th corner, and you put on a 4th set of tzitzit strings. Now, the Mishnah Berurah wants to know, is the Mechaber being very precise in what he says? when he says that this is a problem of Tasa V'loy Min Asui, if you had 3 sets of tzitzis strings that were put on bipsul, and then you made a 4th corner, and then you put on 1, that's puzzle because of Tasa V'loy Min Asui. What if it wasn't 3? What if you had a 3-cornered garment, and you put tzitzis on 1 corner, and then you fashioned the 4th corner, and then you put on the other 3? Now, why is that case different? Well, I might make an argument that in the case that I just described, the roiv, the majority of the tzitzis strings, were put on bekashras. I had a 3-cornered beged. I put on 1 set of tzitzis strings. You're right. That set was put on bipsul. That set was put on before the beged carried a chiyuv of tzitzis. So on that 1 corner, there's a problem of Tasa V'loy Min Asui. But then I cut a 4th corner. So now the beged is chayiv tzitzis, and I put on the other 3 sets. So 3 of the sets were put on bekashras. So roiv was put on bekashras. Is that okay? Says the Mishnah Berurah. No. Mishnah Berurah says, "Eis got you gimel. Lav davka she'asa shalosh tzitzis." The Mechaber is not being meduyik when he says that this is a problem when you put on 3 sets of tzitzis strings bipsul. Shenasu roiv bipsul, because roiv was done bipsul. Tainu kaidim shenasis pasarba. Ela afilu loy kashar ela kesher echad. Even if you only tied 1 knot, imu chuliyasai, with its wrappings, and then you turned it into a 4-cornered garment. Nami pasol oisai hakesher v'tzarich la'tiroi v'lachzer l'koshroi. What the Chavetz Chaim is saying is like this: you took your 3-cornered beged, you took 4 tzitzit strings, you put them in the hole, and you tied. Well, the first way he says it is, you took 1 string, you wrapped it around the others, and you made 1 knot. That's it. Midaraisa, that's all you need. So you did that, and you did it b'psol, Tasa V'loy Min Asui, it's puzzle. Finished, you're done. The only way you can fix this is by undoing it, making a 4th corner, and then redoing it. Now it's interesting the way the Mishnah Berurah writes it, because the Mishnah Berurah says, Kesher echad im chuliyasai. 1 knot with its coils. The implication is that midaraisa, what you need is, you need 1 kesher to tie the tzitzis strings to the beged, and you need 1 set of coils. There's going to be a whole shaila later on, midaraisa. Do you need the first knot that ties it to the beged, or could you start right away with wrappings and then make a knot? We'll see, but we have to remember this Mishnah Berurah. Okay, Ois Katan Yodalad Mishum Tasa. The psul of this sif is Tasa V'loy Min Asui. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzayin Eloymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, what is this psul of Tasa V'loy Min Asui based on? Diksiv, because it says in the pasuk Gedilim Tasa Lachal Arba Kanfos. It says you should put on strings, Gedilim, on what? On Arba Kanfos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Mashba, the implication is Sheyu HaKnafos Asuyos Arba, that you should have a garment that has 4 corners, Koidem Shenasu HaTzitzits, before you put on the tzitzits. You have a beged of Talad Kanfos before you put the tzitzits on. Gedilim Tasalach, on what? Al Arba Kanfos Ksuscha. Lo Shenasu HaTzitzits Koidem HaKnafos, but not that you put on the tzitzits before you have the Dalad Kanfos. Vehevelei Tasa V'loy Min Asui Upesulim. Alkein, therefore, in order to fix this beged, tzarich la'atiram, you would have to remove the tzitzits that were put on before you had Dalad Kanfos, v'lachzer l'kashram, and then to go back and retie them on. V'davka shalish tzitzis rishayim she'asiyasan haya b'psol. But in the Mechaber's case, where you put 3 sets of tzitzis strings on when the beged only had 3 corners, then you made a 4th corner and you put on another set, it's only the first 3 sets that you have to remove and put back on. The 4th set was put on when you had 4 corners. So that 4th set is okay. Now we go to Sivvav. Sivvav, wow, Sivvav is a complex, very complex Sivvav. Okay, Sivvav. I'm trying to think if we need some audio-visual help over here, which I'm terrible at. My apologies. Okay, here we have a talis. Okay, nice 4-cornered garment. Now, let's say this talis is very big. Okay, I don't know talis sizes off the top of my head, but But this is a very big talus, and if I put it on, I'm afraid it's going to be dragging on the floor, or the tzitzits are going to be dragging on the floor. And this is the only talus that I have, so I don't want to wear it this way. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the talus, and I'm going to fold it in half. Okay. Now I have a shorter talus. Why is it shorter? Because I folded it in half. Okay. Now, I want it to be a pretty talus. Zekeli van Veu is not lefanav mitzvahs. Aselecha talus no. So I don't want to just fold the talus in half and put it on me when it's folded. No, I'll take it to the dry cleaners. I'm just saying this to make like a practical case out of it. I'll take it to the dry cleaners, and I'm going to show them I wanted to put it on the press, and I wanted to press a nice sharp seam in the middle. So now I really have a nice, flat pressed garment with a nice crisp crease over here. And now that's the way I'm going to wear it. I'm going to put it on, and I'm going to put it on. It's going to be folded in half. During the winter, it'll even be warmer. It's a great chap. It's a nice warm talus. If I have to daven in the tent because of COVID, it's nice and warm because it's double thickness. Where do you put the tzitzis? What do I mean, where do you put the tzitzis? Well, I'm going to wear it like this. Well, if I'm going to wear it like this, where are the daled kanfes? The daled kanfes are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are the daled kanfes, the way I'm going to wear it. So maybe I should put the tzitzis over there. On the other hand, this garment, all it is folded. Really, this is the garment. So in that case, it's here, 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 and here, the 4 corners. Now, if I put the tzitzits on in this way, so I put them on these 4 corners, right? Then what's going to happen if I unfold the talus? If I unfold it, right? I unfold it. Now there are tzitzits hanging here in the middle, right? Because I put tzitzits over here, the corners that I'm holding this paper by. That's where I put tzitzits. So if I unfold it, now it has tzitzits in the middle, and it has no tzitzits up here. So the question becomes, where do I put the tzitzis on this type of beged? And believe it or not, this is a machlokes in the Gemara in Menachos. I believe it's Mem Aleph Amud Beis, Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. Gemara Menachos Mem Aleph Amud Aleph. This is a machlokes where you should put the tzitzis. Now, everybody is saying to themselves, well, I'm sure that you got to put the tzitzis over here. Well, believe it or not, the Chachamim, at least the way the Rambam, the Chachamim say that you should put them, the Chachamim say that you put the tzitzis here. You put the tzitzits on the beged the way you're going to wear the beged when it's folded. Reb Shimon says no. Reb Shimon says you put it on the regular unfolded corners. Now the Rambam happens to paskin like Reb Shimon. The Rambam paskins like Reb Shimon, and he says, you know where you put them? You put them, did I say this right? Yeah, the Chachamim say you put it the way it's folded. Reb Shimon says you put it the way it's unfolded. And the Mechaber, like is his typical way of doing things, paskins like the Rambam. So, says the Mechaber here in Sivav, top line, Yudches Amud Aleph. Ein koiflen es a talus. Do not fold a talus. Umatilim tzitzits al knafeha. And then put tzitzits on the corners. Kemoi shehi kefula. The way the talus is folded. Says the Mechaber, don't do this. Don't do that. That would be the sheet of the Chachamim. Don't do that. No. Instead, Hagah, says the Ramah, Avol tzarich lahatel ba'arba knafeha pshutim. Instead, what you do is, you put it on the 4 corners when it is unfolded. Continues the Mechaber, Ela im kain tefara kula, unless you stitch it closed. Va'afilu meruachachas. Even if you only stitch it closed on one side. What does that mean on one side? Well, when you fold this garment, it's got one closed end, right? That's the middle at the crease. That end is closed. It's got 3 open ends. Says the Mechaber, do not put the tzitzits on the 4 corners created by the fold unless you sew it closed. Unless you sew it closed, but sew it closed means even if you only sew it closed on one side. Okay. That is the Mechaber. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tezvav. Shehi Kfula. Don't put the tzitzits on by the corners that are fashioned after you fold the garment. Because, says the Mishnah Berurah, Shem Tipashet, because if you simply open up the fold, Nimtzu Atzitzis Be'emtziisa. Now, where are the tzitzits? The tzitzits are in the middle of the garment, where I'm holding it, right? That's where the tzitzits are going to be. The tzitzits are going to be here in the middle, if you open it up. And says the Chavetz Chaim, that doesn't work. Va'anan tzitzits al hakonof be'inon. We need the tzitzits to be on the corner. But in that scenario, they're not going to be on the corner. Ois Katan Tezayin. So the Ramah says, what do? You put them on the corners, hapshutim. You put them on the corners that are fashioned when you unfold the garment. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, let's say the reason you're folding the beged is because you have a beged that you cannot possibly wear. It is much too long. It's twice your height. So you simply can't wear it the way it is. And that's why you're folding it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you simply can't wear it without folding it, then yesh paiskin de paitron oisay legambri menatzitzis. Then there are those that say that this beged is completely potter from tzitzits. They ain't shem beged alav, because it's not called a beged. And the Pri Begadim says in such a case, you put the tzitzits on the open corners, but you don't make a bracha because there are shitas that hold that this is totally potter in tzitzis. What is this shita? This seems to be the shita of the Nemuka Yosef. The Nemuka Yosef learns pshat in that Gemara in Menachos totally differently. We learned pshat in the Gemara in Menachos like the Rambam. We learn pshat that the Gemara Menachos is talking about the folded beged. The Chachamim say put the tzitzits on the way it's folded, and Reb Shimon says no, put the tzitzits on the corners of when it would be opened. The Nemuka Yosef doesn't learn that way. The Nemuka Yosef holds that Reb Shimon doesn't say put tzitzits on the way the beged would be opened. Reb Shimon says that if the beged, if you're talking about a beged that was folded because it's too big to wear, you don't put tzitzits on at all, because it's a beged that's potter in tzitzits. Okay, I've cut Yud Zayin. Va'afilim meruach achas. If you stitch it closed, then even if you only stitched it closed on one side, then you put on the tzitzits the way the beged's folded, because it's not going to open. Right? The whole problem was that if you open it, the tzitzits are in the middle. But now it's not going to open. You sewed it closed. Ayin bebir halacha. 3 words in the Mishnah Berurah here. Ayin bebir halacha. This is long bir halacha here. Dibra maschel. Elim came tfara kula v'afilim merach achas. What the bir halacha discusses is, what does that mean, even if you sewed it only on one side? The way I told you was, there are 3 open sides created by the fold. Even if you stitch one side, so that's it. It's closed and it's not going to open. That's one way of understanding the Rambam. There are other ways of understanding it. That afilim meruach achas refers to the method of stitching. There's a stitching where the needle goes from both sides. There's a stitching where the needle only goes from one side. And it's talking about different methods of stitchiology. Okay. I was cutting your ches. We didn't do yet. Let's see the Ramah, second line from the bottom end of the line, Haggah. V'yesh oimrim dechayavin afilu b'loi tfira. There are those that say that no, you put the tzitzits on the corners created by the fold, even if you do not stitch it closed. Excuse me. And the Ramah says, v'toiv lasis la tzitzits avaloi levarech aleha. The Ramah says an astonishing thing. He says you should put tzitzits on the way the garment is when it's folded, but don't make a bracha on it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cutting Yud Ches to Chayavin. First, he just amends the wording a little bit of the Ramah. The wording of the Ramah is a little hard to understand. V'yesh oimrim de Chayavin. There are those that say that the beged is chayiv afilu b'loi tfira, even without stitching. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, what does that mean? The chayavin lahatel bekanfei akfulois. Some say that you're chayiv to put the tzitzits on the corners created by the fold, even if you didn't sew it closed. Why? Because as long as it's folded, and it doesn't open, shame talis aleha k'moshe yikvula. You took this garment, you folded it in half, you took it to the dry cleaner, you had it pressed. This is the way you're going to wear it, so then it's a beged. And the beged is this way, the way it's folded. So you got to put tzitzits on the corners, the way it is when it's folded. That's the Yeshomrim, that's the rush. So what does the Ramah say? So now that we have this rush, you should put the tzitzits on the way it's folded and don't make a bracha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Katan Yutes. Tamu kala achronim. The achronim react to this Ramah in wonderment. Ma tikein b'ma shelo yavarich. What is the Ramah fixing? What eights is the Ramah giving us that we should put tzitzits on the way it's folded and then don't make a bracha? It's a four-cornered beged. It's chayiv in tzitzits. Maybe the halach is like the mechaber, and the tzitzits have to go on the corners the way it is when it's unfolded. And if you put the tzitzits on over here, you didn't pater the beged in tzitzits because you put tzitzits on the middle of the beged, and you need tzitzits hakanov. So according to the mechaber, you have a four-cornered garment without kosher tzitzits on it. So how could you wear it? So what's the Ramah telling me? Put tzitzits on the way it's folded. Don't make a bracha. Big deal, you didn't make a bracha. How are you allowed to wear it? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Ma tikein b'ma shelo yavarich. Ha'adayin shemek ha'mechaber v'tarach la'atav apshutim. Ve'echiel bash beged. How can you wear it? Now, what are you going to say? So you'll put on 6 tzitzis? You'll put tzitzis on like this, and then you'll put another set of tzitzis here. You'll put 6 tzitzis. You can't do that. Ha'yoyser me'arba tzitzis also la'hisav l'kulei alma. You can't put tzitzis on more than 4 corners. That would be Bal Taisif. Omaske Ledina and the Achrayim reached the conclusion the Yizara lechatchila shalaylasa is talis kfula, that lechatchila you should make sure not to make a folded talis. Eli in kein tfara, unless you sew it closed, va'afila betfiras rechavais, even if you only use basting stitches. The kevin shet tfara shovein asuya lihipashet, because once you stitch it down, it's not going to open. Va'az bein betalis berubas, bein betalis shoyse betchila ruka yoyse bidai, yatel tzitzis bakfulim v'yavarich. And by stitching it, now you don't have a problem. Now, no matter what the reason why you're folding it is, whether you're folding it because it's too long or you're folding it for other reasons, if you stitched it closed, you could put tzitzits on the 4 corners created by the stitching. Now, the next piece of this sivav is very complex, so I'm not going to start it now because we're not going to have time to finish it. I'm recording this on Thursday evening. I may do a share tomorrow on Erev Shabbos to conclude this and to pick up a page so that we get back on the schedule. Stay tuned to tomorrow. And if not, everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. Thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. Be well.